Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this morning for our webinar, 8,000 Days of Retirement. My name is Jenna Witherby, and I am one of the advisors on the team at 401k Plan Professionals. And if you're not familiar with our team and what we do, we spend 100% of our time helping companies with their retirement plans, primarily 401k plans, 403b plans in the nonprofit space. So we're hired on as a resource for not only the plan administrators and the investment committees with selecting the investments, making sure we have a really solid fiduciary process in place, plan design consulting. We do a lot of employee education as well. Today's webinar is a part of our webinar series, and we like to bring you different types of topics, not just 401k plan topics. So kind of like outer surrounding financial wellness type of different topics. And typically our webinars are about 30 minutes. Today's is longer. It will be 1 hour. That does allow time for Q&A at the end of John's presentation. But today does have SHRM credit that goes along with it. So we will be tracking the attendees, and you'll get more information on how to submit to get your SHRM credit. We do have a recording that goes out afterwards. There's also, when you exit out of this webinar, there is a little survey that pops up. So we'd appreciate if you'd answer those few questions. That just helps us with future content. All of our previous webinars are out on our website, 401kplanprofessionals.com, as well as on our YouTube channel. And so we do, on the next slide here, we have a QR that brings you to our YouTube channel. So this has our webinar series, a lot of really great short Q&A type videos. I also host fiduciary training 3 or 4 times a year for plan sponsors. And so those are all housed out there, and you can subscribe, and that way you get a little notification every time that we have a new webinar that goes out. All right, so for today, 8,000 Days of Retirement, it's a treat for us to have John Diehl with us today. John has been with the Hartford and Hartford Funds for more than 30 years. He leads their research efforts with the MIT AgeLab, as well as other thought leaders. John's view on the future of retirement planning have been published in the Wall Street Journal, Financial Planning Magazine, and other publications. He's been on CNBC and Bloomberg Television. He's also been a presenter at our fiduciary summit that we have every spring. And we always get just raving reviews about any sort of insights that John can provide us with. So thank you so much for being here today, John. And I will let you take it from here.
Thanks, Jenna, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I hope you enjoy my picture that was taken in 10th grade. I really should update that, but it's very nice to be with you all today. As Jenna said, I've been with Hartford Funds now for over 30 years, but the bulk of my career at Hartford Funds has been spent studying aging and longevity. And I should remark before I get into our content that if you're looking for that 1 hour of CE credit for SHRM today, you'll need to stay on our webinar for the entire duration of the call. And then you will receive a certificate of completion from Hartford Funds home office, and you can use that to report your SHRM credit. So yes, been with Hartford Funds for a long time, but the last 25 years or so, been studying aging and longevity, essentially looking at changing demographics, the impact of technology, how it changes lifestyles. And perhaps if you've seen me at one of the 401k Plan Professional Summits, I may have mentioned our work with the MIT AgeLab. So just to refresh you that I might have met before, and for those that it's the first time we've met, let me tell you a little bit about the MIT AgeLab. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, on MIT's main campus, is a laboratory of about 40 researchers, not all engineers, although engineering is very well represented, sociologists, physiologists, psychologists, a whole bunch of ologists. I guess I left out anthropologists and physiologists. Well, they're studying changing lifestyle, extended longevity, changing demographics, and they're helping industries and companies really project what future products or what future services may be needed. So I like to give you a little example of some of the work that they do because their work is not concentrated in retirement and financial services. That's just one of the areas that they work in. And I think we learn more about preparing people for retirement by talking to other companies and other industries at the Age Lab about what's changing about their client or their employees, because that can help us think about how we can better help people prepare for retirement. So take, for example, the Volkswagen Beetle on the screen. That's the world's only $2 million Volkswagen Bug. It is tricked out with all kinds of technology meant to measure driver acceptance of new technology in the automobile. It's actually where our relationship at the Hartford and Hartford Funds started. Was back in 1999, we realized that aging and auto accidents were running in parallel. Now, that's pretty important if you think about the fact that the Hartford, our parent company, is the auto insurer of the AARP. So we were one of the founding sponsors of the MIT AgeLab, along with automotive companies such as BMW and Toyota, as well as companies like Procter and Gamble and others. But the whole purpose for us was to study auto technology and how we could keep aging drivers on the road longer and safer, because we saw what was coming in terms of the demographic shifts. So perhaps some of you today are driving automobiles equipped with lane departure warning systems, reverse monitoring, smart backup, all that kind of stuff. If you are, you might be surprised to learn that many of those technologies were rooted in the study of the aging driver. By the way, those researchers that you see on the slide leaning up against the car, they're dressed in a funny looking outfit. What they're wearing is actually an aging suit. The name of the suit is called Agnes. Everything in MIT is an acronym. It stands for Age Gain Now Empathy System. We could take any of you listening, we could dress you in the Agnes suit, and we could simulate what it would feel like to be somewhere between 80 and 83 years old. You may say, who in the world would want to do that? Well, what if you were a major American retailer thinking about whether your stores were laid out in a manner that would accommodate an aging US population? What better way than to take the management team, dress them in the Agnes suit, dial them up to age 80, and go shopping in your own stores? Maybe the light bulb goes off around shelving redesign, lighting, floor transitions to minimize falls, so on and so forth. So I guess my point, folks, is that the research that's going on up at MIT has practical implications for the products and services that we may be looking to use in the future. Just a little note of interest, if that Agnes suit sounds pretty cool, I think it's still out there, but a few years ago, if you know the actor Chris Hemsworth, the guy that played Thor in all the Marvel movies, he did a 6-part series for the National Geographic Channel. And I think it's still out there on, if you have a My Disney subscription. And it's called Limitless with Chris Hemsworth. It was like a 6-part series examining longevity and the factors that weigh into it. Well, in the 6th part of that series, MIT actually made a custom-made Agnes suit for Chris Hemsworth so he could experience what it would feel like when he got to be that age. So just a little interesting note. But for today's presentation, what we really want to talk about is Dr. Joe Coughlin. Dr. Joe is the current director. He's actually the founder of the MIT AgeLab. And our challenge today is what he states here on our slide. We have a longevity paradox. People are now living longer than we've ever lived before in society. But here's the problem. We don't have a really good idea of what to do with all that additional time. So I want you to kind of look at our presentation today in a couple of ways. The presentation is called 8,000 Days. I'll explain to you what the significance is of 8,000 days. And again, I hope you kind of look at this a couple of ways. One is for yourself personally, and kind of thinking about, am I thinking about my 8,000 days and kind of what transitions look like in my life? Secondly, maybe you can look at the content I'll share today with a loved one in mind, a friend or a family member, in terms of how they're prepared for extended longevity in retirement. And then lastly, if either you are managing plan participants, you're an employer, even if you're a participant, it's looking at it and thinking about, wow, how can I better educate those around me so that they are better prepared? So we'll talk about 8,000 days, what it's all about. And then we'll talk about four phases of retirement. The MIT AgeLab now believes that in retirement, you can't just take one word called retirement and characterize that as something that covers a quarter to a third of our entire life on Earth. Actually, what they say is you can now divide retirement into four distinct phases. Many of us will visit three of the four phases, if not all four. So we'll talk about what's important and what's changing in terms of retirement and therefore how we prepare for it. And lastly, that last point is we'll talk about how all these changes do make us think differently about what we need to do in order to prepare for a high quality of life as we age. So let's start with 8,000 days and what it's all about. So the MIT Age Lab tells us that today your life can be divided roughly into four 8,000 day segments. So imagine this, it's about 8,000 days from the day you're born to the day you graduate from college, university, begin your career. It'll be another 8,000 days from the beginning of your career to your first midlife crisis. I say first midlife crisis because we're all living longer. We have time for multiple midlife crises. It'll be another 8,000 days from midlife crisis to the time we decide to retire most of the time. And then on average, it'll be another 8,000 days from retirement to expirement, although obviously no one knows how long that last segment will last. But folks, one of the first things that kind of takes people by surprise is the fact that you will likely be retired for as long as you were alive between birth and graduation from college and university. If you've done the math in your head already, that 8,000 days equates to just shy of 22 years. So you're looking at ages 22, 44, 66, and 88. Now, if we go back and kind of look at how all this plays out, what MIT tells us, think about Dr. Joe's quote there for a second about how we don't have a good idea of how to fill all that time. Here's why that becomes problematic in today's culture. If you think about it, the script for the first three segments has already been written. We know in that learning phase, we're supposed to go to school, get good grades so you can get into the college, university, armed service, or career of your choice. In this second phase, everything's growing. Hopefully, income's growing because job skills are growing, your network's growing, your family may be growing, all until we get to that point, usually in our mid 40s to early 50s, where we turn and look at that spouse or significant other and we speak to them for the first time in 20 years because we've been busy going to little league games, dance recitals, swim meets, you name it. And we start to pause when the kids are approaching leaving the nest and we say, what is this going to look like on the other side of this period of life we're in right now? But you probably won't leave the workforce at that point. You're approaching a phase in your life where you're nearing peak earnings. Everybody's depending on you, but eventually, about 8,000 days later, you will say, you know what, it's time to do something different, and you will retire. Now, also note in those first three segments, you probably had mentors along the way. You had parents and teachers and bosses and coworkers. But who's there to teach us what retirement should be like? It's kind of like we all start with a blank slate at the time we retire, and we get to write on that slate. But the way most people think about what to do in retirement is based on the experiences that they've seen their parents and grandparents and maybe friends kind of live out. But the problem is today's retirement looks a lot different than retirement did just a few years ago. In fact, maybe you are familiar in your communities or maybe even in your families. I have to share with you, I had an aunt who lived to 106 years old. That what she would keep saying from about 100 years on was, I just hope I outlive my eyesight because I love to read. I just hope my eyes are here for me. But to touch on who some of these people are on the screen, Sister Ina Canabaro is the world's current oldest living person at age 116. Next to her is Jean Calment, who is the world's oldest documented living person. Jean passed away years ago, but she lived to be the oldest, the Guinness Book of World Records tells us, of anyone ever. Now, the interesting thing about Jean, she might have lived to 128, but she picked up the habit of smoking at 114. She did quit at 118, but Jean made it to 122. I think we'd all be happy if we could make it there. Catherine Switzer, right next to Jean Calmette, 5 years ago, was celebrated for finishing the Boston Marathon at age 70. Well, you may think, well, John, probably a lot of people finish at age 70. It was the 50th anniversary of which Catherine Switzer was the first woman to finish the Boston Marathon. So think about that. She ran it first at age 20. She ran it 50 years later, right? So if you ever want to know some interesting history, though, take a look at Catherine Switzer, Google her, and see what happened back when she was 20 years old, when the head of the Boston Athletic Association discovered a woman was running in his marathon. I already kind of spoiled it. I would have said spoiler alert, but I told you she finished. But there is some interesting activity that happened. I think it was between miles 13 and 15. So take a look sometime if you get a chance. And next to her, Wang Deshun, who is the world's oldest living fashion model, now at age 88. So, folks, I think the point of these examples of people on our slide is not only are people living longer, they're actually living better. From what we know in terms of diet, nutrition, exercise, from new pipelines in medicines and therapies and devices, people are now living a longer quality of life. And so the impact that has on retirement, by the way, just to touch on it, today in the United States, if I have two people, husband and wife, both age 65, there's now a 50-50 chance that one of the two lives to age 92. That means there's a 50-50 chance that one of the two lives longer than age 92. And ladies, I probably don't have to tell you who the odds are in favor of there. But if this is the longevity era that we're now living in, it changes kind of what the traditional retirement story was. So the traditional retirement story, if we think about it, used to be something like, hey, let's take some rides, ride our bikes on the beach for a few years, save up for that big trip around the world, maybe squeeze a few rounds of golf or shopping in between. Well, folks, let me tell you that picture of retirement was created in the 1950s. If you've ever heard of a guy by the name of Del Webb, Del Webb was a real estate developer. He opened the first senior living community in the United States in Sun City, Arizona on January 1st of 1960. Now, Del Webb's idea was if he could get kind of densely populated real estate, densely populated homes around golf courses, swimming pools, leisure activities where socialization would be easy, that people would sell their homes in Seattle and Chicago and New York. They'd move across the country, move to the middle of the desert just so they could be around these kind of activities. Critics said he was crazy. The first day it opened, January 1st, 1960, they had a line of miles 4 miles long outside of Sun City, Arizona, and the retirement of leisure was born. The problem is that retirement was only meant to last like 4 to 7 years, right? So when we retired at 65 and lived maybe to our early 70s, yeah, we needed to fit these activities in. But now with the longevity I just shared with you, the retirement story has changed. The retirement story is now about where are we going to live? Maybe we'll be living in multiple places. What will we be doing? Do I want to continue working? Do I want to start a new business? Do I want to volunteer? What other hobbies or activities did I not have a chance to take part in that now I'm able to? And really important, where's the family? Or let's be honest, where's the grandchildren? That's a big driver of things. So see, we have all these opportunities now in front of us, largely created by extended longevity. So with that in mind, this is where we get to this concept of 4 phases of retirement. Because if you think about it, were you the same person at age 3 as you were at age 23? Probably not. In the same way, you're not the same person at age 66 as you will be at 73, as you will be at 82, as you will be at 95. So MIT says we can actually break retirement into 4 distinct phases. Now, when I say 4 phases of retirement, the first question I usually get is, okay, John, at what age does this phase begin? The phases of retirement are typically not determined by chronological age. They're really determined by four resources that we all have available. I'm sorry, three resources we all have available to us. One is your physical resource. How's your health? Do you have the health to be able to enjoy the things you'd hope to in retirement? Secondly, are your finances. Have you financially prepared to live out your years in retirement? And third, and most often overlooked, are your social resources. How connected are you to friends and family? How connected are you in your community? You know, Harvard, MIT, Yale, among others, have done studies that show that social relationships are probably the best predictor of long-lived, healthy life. But I'll tell you, folks, when it comes to retirement, many times, and this includes us in our industry, we've kind of highly focused on one aspect of retirement. And I'm not going to say it's incorrect not to think about finances. I am going to say it's incomplete because unless we couple the finances with health and with social connection or mission and purpose, we will find that quality of life may suffer regardless of the wealth we have. And the other is true. If we haven't prepared financially, it doesn't matter how great our relationships are, we may struggle at some point. So understand it's a balance of those three factors, physical, financial, and social, that really makes the difference in terms of quality of life as we age. So with that, let me talk about these four phases of retirement. We call them the honeymoon phase, the big decision phase, navigating longevity, and the solo journey phase. So let me touch on each one and explain why they're significant and especially what we see changing as the demographics of the country change. So the first is what we call the honeymoon phase. And this is one everybody's probably familiar with. This is the easiest one for us to conceive of because this is the phase that we've all thought retirement would be through our working years. You get your calendar back. You can spend your time with the people and on the things that you've wanted to catch up on, right? That you've wanted to make a priority in your life. But one of the things that is most rapidly changing about this first phase of retirement is the role of work. Why is that? Well, for a couple of reasons. One, many of us don't work in the physically intensive labor industries anymore, where, it used to be that, my value to my company was based on my physical stamina to be able to stand at an assembly line and work for 8 to 10 hours a day for 5 days a week. Many of us now are in the knowledge industry. And for many of us, if I had an electrical outlet and a Wi-Fi connection, I could work from pretty much anywhere in the world. And again, with access to transportation, I can show up in the home office every now and then. So for aging employees, it actually gave more flexibility to say, I actually like what I do, or actually some parts of what I do. If I could continue to do that and kind of work a little bit more flexibly, because when I say work is changing the first phase of retirement, people are like, oh no, we're not talking about the way you work the first 20 to 40 years of your career. We're talking about working more flexibly. We're talking about working part-time. We're talking about possibly working for a cause that you're interested in, aka volunteering, right? So the role of work is changing. And remote work, as I just mentioned, may actually favor older workers, but there's one other aspect that we need to think about. Maybe some of you on the call today are feeling this, and that is, as America ages, a lot of our talent at our companies are approaching the ages where they're aging out of the business, right? So they take with them not only a bunch of experience, but also they're often the culture carriers who help create kind of that culture where we work. So many employers are actually now looking at the aging worker segment saying, are there ways that we can devise maybe different positions that are, set up differently where we can retain these workers for a few more years? So again, keeping older workers for their experience and for the culture is important. And it may occur at the same time where they're saying, hey, remote work now gives me the opportunity to work a little more flexibly than I may have been able to in the past. Now, it's interesting when we think about retirement and why people work in retirement, this one may surprise you. Money comes in at number three on average. The top two are that I want to do something to stay active and involved. And I actually, as I mentioned earlier, like what I do. So one of the things we see, and we should be really cognizant of this. One of the biggest downsides of this extended period of longevity is the problem of boredom, loneliness, isolation, and depression, especially as we age. And it's especially a risk for the men in the audience today, right? And for male participants at our companies. Why is that? Because ladies, despite your increasing importance in the workforce over the last 70 years, women typically retain the role of chief operating officer of the household. And we observe that women rebuild social networks faster than men do. Men sometimes, when they leave the primary place of employment, they have a very difficult time rebuilding social networks or rebuilding them as quickly as women do. And so, one of the reasons why people want to continue to work is it's where my friends are, right? My coworkers, my suppliers, my clients. It also generates trust and respect. I get value out of working. So, again, wanting to stay active and involved is really key. And that's why it's changing that first phase of retirement. When this phase begins, you're probably providing more financial help to your adult children than you are to your aging parents. But at some point during the honeymoon phase, oftentimes this shifts. Why do we include this slide? Because if there's one thing I could tell you from the focus groups that we do, when we ask people who've retired for about 10 years, so looking back, was retirement, did it go the way you thought it would? If the answer is no, which it is many times, the number one reason the answer is no is they'll say, nobody ever told me that 4 years in, mom would break a hip and she'd be moving in with us. And they'll follow that with, look, we're glad she did. It was a great experience and we were glad we could be there for her, but we never thought about it. So I want to encourage you all to be thinking about the roles that you play in your family. Will you ever get the tap on the shoulder to provide care for another, be it a spouse, a parent, a sibling, a child, or a grandchild? Because we need to think about that caregiving role as we begin to plan out both the quality of life in terms of socialization and in terms of our own health, as well as the financial implications. And speaking of financial implications, this honeymoon phase is where the rubber will hit the road. And what do I mean by that? I mean that oftentimes your plan participants will not be thinking about what they might actually need in retirement. Sooner or later, they may jump into a calculator or something. We might jump in and try and figure it out. But 60% of workers today expect to receive a benefit from a traditional defined benefit pension plan. The bad news, only 40% say they ever worked for a company that offered one. So unless you're all familiar with companies that are rolling out DB plans, like crazy, I think what we have are mismatched expectations. So as I said, in this first phase of retirement, it's not a hypothetical calculation anymore. It'll take 2 to 3 years to settle into kind of patterns of income and spending where whether you're prepared or not, during the honeymoon phase, the rubber will hit the road. So eventually the honeymoon phase gives way to what we call the big decision phase. And we call it that because if you hadn't already made some big decisions in your life, this is where they will come to a head. This is usually signposted by the time someone says, I think it's time to cut back from the number of hours I'm working or I'm volunteering or whatever that may be. And MIT says that there are three key questions that you need to be asking yourself during this phase. And I'll just share with you these three questions, the answers to these questions, MIT says are actually predictive of your future quality of life. And they would say anyone 45 or older ought to be thinking about these three questions, if not for yourself, then for someone that you care about. Again, maybe a parent, maybe a sibling or a friend. These questions are probably going to underwhelm you with their simplicity coming from the rocket scientist at MIT, but hang with me for a minute and we'll talk about the questions. I'll share with you what they are, and then we'll talk about them briefly individually to tell you why they're so important. So you ready? Here are the three questions. Who will change your light bulbs? How will you get an ice cream cone? And who will you have lunch with? Now, usually I put this slide up, people are kind of like, what in the world is he talking about? Let me explain. Let's talk about light bulbs for a second. About 90% of Americans state that they intend on aging in their own homes. How many of us spend 30 or 40 minutes beginning to think about what changes or modifications may be needed to be made to my home in order to make it livable for me, not just to my early 70s, but to my 80s, 90s, perhaps beyond. When we think about who will change my light bulbs and the home that we'll be living in, I should share with you that the average American will move 12 and a half times during your lifetime. The majority of those moves will occur after age 60. You may be thinking, I am never going to move again. I've had it with moving. When we get to that point, you may decide to upsize, you may decide to downsize, you may decide to move closer to children, or let's be honest, grandchildren. You may want to move away from children and grandchildren. You may need to live with children and grandchildren. You may need the care of a care community at some point in your life. Why do I bring this up? We can't think of it as black and white anymore. Where we live, the home that we live in, should now be thought of as a continuum. So if I'm not able to stay here anymore, where would I go next? If I live in a two-story home where it's going to be difficult getting up steps because there's no bedrooms or baths on the first floor, maybe I'm thinking about that next stop to more of a one level. Maybe if I'm getting to a point where medical concerns are on my mind, I'm thinking about transitioning to a care community at some point. By the way, the average age American entering into a continuing care retirement community independent living division is 83 years old. We are staying in our homes as long as we can, but at some point, it may not be safe or practical any longer. So we need to think about the home that we'll be living in. And if we are going to age in our own homes, what will we have to spend on services and modifications to be able to keep us there? So that's what that first light bulb question is all about, which is the home that you intend to age in and what might be next. Because if you don't think about it, let's say we're in our mid to later 80s, I fall and break my hip. I'm in the rehab facility. My kids are getting the call saying, hey, your dad can't go back home again. You got 6 weeks to figure out where he's going to go. That's when mistakes are made. So we're trying to move the decision points away from the moment of crisis where we can think a little more clear-minded about where we might want to go next. How will I get an ice cream cone is all about how you access the small things that make life worth living. One of the aspects of living longer that we don't often think about is that by living longer, you greatly increase the odds that at some point you'll lose the ability to drive. And if you do, how will you access? Not, we didn't ask how are you going to get to your doctor's appointment. Someone will figure that out. It's a nice night. You just want to go down the road a few miles to enjoy an ice cream cone. If you're not able to drive, how will you access that? Because those small things, we all know now what it feels like to be isolated from the people, organizations, and activities that we enjoy on a daily basis from what we went through during the COVID crisis. What I'm trying to emphasize is that sometimes that kind of isolation is self-imposed. If we insist on continuing to live in a rural area where if I was not able to drive, my quality of life would be diminished immediately, it's something we need to think about. So two morals to this story. One is we need to be thinking about technology. I'm not telling you to hold your breath and wait for your Google car to pick you up, but I can tell you that only about 30% of Americans over age 65 have ever taken a lift in a ride in an Uber or Lyft ride sharing service, right? I will tell you that I think those services are some of the most liberating services that people can access if they know how they work. And this is a key. You can't just tell someone, hey, you should take an Uber. For someone that's never used it before, it's very intimidating. If you're a user of those services, think about those in your social network that have never experienced it. Maybe get in the car with them, show them how it works so that they may be challenged next time that there's an activity at night that they'd rather not drive at night. Maybe they would want to access technology to help them solve that problem. The other question that this brings to bear is where is the location of the home that you're hoping to age in? And the reason we ask this is that about 70% of Americans live in suburban and rural environments where if we lost the ability to drive, quality of life would be immediately impacted. Some of the fastest growing communities of over age 65 are forming around college and university environments. In fact, there's some developers that are putting up like essentially dorms for alumni that come back to the college to age because in those university environments, You have education, you have culture, you have sports. You oftentimes have cutting edge medical technology and teaching hospitals, and they often offer walkable access to many of the things we desire: bars, restaurants, beauty salons, medical services, so on and so forth. So, how will I get an ice cream cone is all about accessing the things that you'll want access to. And the last one I touched on already, but it's who will I have lunch with. Why is this so important? Because no matter how old we are, we need to always be thinking about where will we be in a place where we have the potential to meet new people and form new relationships. Relationships are key. They keep us cognitively sharp. They give us things to look forward to, a reason to circle the date on the calendar, and they help to beat back the epidemic of loneliness that has beset us now. One problem for us is that we think when we're 70, we can make friends the same way as we did when we were 24. We actually peak at making friends around age 24 because we're in environments where we're surrounded by people the same age as we are. That typically doesn't happen to us in our 70s or 80s. So we have to be more intentional about social engagement as we age. So again, the home we're going to live in, the access we have to things that are important to us on a daily basis, the little things, and the strength of the social network, and where can I be active and stay involved. Eventually, this will give way to the third phase of retirement, which we call navigating longevity. And this is signposted, obviously, when someone in the family needs a fair amount of caregiving. And it's interesting because when we think about what concerns people most about retirement, up until age 65, we've done a good job from the financial standpoint. We got everybody thinking numbers, right? Numbers, numbers, numbers. Up to age 65, it's all about the money. How much do I need? When can I go? How much can I take? How long will it last? But look what happens after age 65. All of a sudden, health becomes a primary concern. Money actually begins to take a back seat. What good is all the money in the world if I don't have the health to enjoy it? And more specifically, over age 75, not only is it health, it's the concern around cognitive decline and then money. So again, any education that we can give folks about healthy, healthy physical exercise, healthy nutrition, so on and so forth, is going to last them throughout those retirement years. Now, if you've ever been placed in the role of a caregiver, by the way, the caregiver on average is 62 years old. They're spending a little shy of $10,000 out of pocket, although that number may be a little bit light. And most of them wouldn't call themselves caregivers. They would say, this is just what a good son, daughter, brother, sister would do. But what starts out as just a couple of calls home a week, make sure mom and dad are doing okay, turns into, oh, can you fix this? Can you take care of that while you're over here? And can you help me manage the medication? And you may eventually now have to start attending doctor's appointments so that we're all on the same page with what the doctor is saying. And we'll probably have multiple doctors that we need to be thinking about that point. And it may eventually evolve to a situation where you're taking care of someone, maybe even in your own home. You're helping to cook, you may be paying bills, you may really be helping them with lots of the activities of daily life. So caregiving is not for the faint of heart. And, it's important because the responsibilities go well beyond oftentimes what people expect. Like, yeah, I'll need to pick up medicines and make sure we sort them out into pill boxes. That's part of the job, but it's actually much bigger and more intensive than just that. So you may be, as I mentioned, preparing meals. You may be helping with activities of daily living, arranging, providing transportation, attending doctor's appointments. Tree falls in mom and dad's front yard. Who takes care of getting rid of it? Oftentimes it falls to the caregiver. This is why it's really important to be thinking about, A, where will our care come from? Have we had conversations with family? And B, if you are in the role of a potential caregiver, have you had conversations with your loved one about what that might look like? So navigating longevity is the third phase. And last is the phase nobody likes to think about, but MIT reminds us that aging is not a team sport, right? Because we're living longer, we greatly increase the odds that at some point we may be living alone. When we think about living alone, I'll put up a couple of statistics. Today in the US, about 42% of women over age 75, about 23% of men over age 75 live in households of one. Primary reason, divorce rates since the 1990s Gray divorce, you may have heard the term, has doubled, but the one that really surprises people is that the average age of widowhood in the United States is 59 years old. People hear that, they say that seems so young, and it does. What happens is men tend to marry younger. If they marry a second or subsequent time, oftentimes it's much younger. You lay that over mortality, and you see how we get there. And I would just share with you, if we were in a room with 50 to 100 people, it usually never fails that after I'm done speaking, it's usually a couple people lining up. They're usually women. And if I had to guess, they'd be in their mid to late 50s. And they line up to say, I can't believe you just said that. Let me tell you my story. So MIT says, actually, we need to be thinking about planning, if we're a member of a couple, we need to be thinking about planning two retirements. The first retirement is the one that we spend together. The second retirement is the one where we may be spending alone. And by the way, when we prepare for that second retirement, both parts of the couple need to prepare for that second part, because whether you're male, female, regardless, you need to be thinking about the eventuality that you may be the last person standing. And what does that mean? Because often what we see upon becoming single, people are oftentimes thrown back into one of those earlier phases. They may be asking questions like, do I have to work? Do I want to work? Right? Do I want to stay in the home where we were for the last 20 years that, 4 bedrooms, big yard, just me? Or do I want to downsize and move closer to friends or family members? If my significant other or my spouse was my primary caregiver, how will I plan care in their absence? Will I need to pay contractors? Will I need to look for contributions from social organizations? Kind of how does that look? That's all part of the solo journey phase. But folks, look, those last two phases, navigating longevity and solo journey, they're kind of bummers. I don't want to leave you in the ditch here. I want to kind of raise you up with my favorite slide in the entire deck. It's called the age you peak at everything. So let me explain how it works. All the numbers that you see on the graph correspond to a particular age at which you peak at a life milestone. So let me show you how this works. Let's say you're worried because you can't remember names anymore. As long as you're over age 22, that's perfectly normal, because you can see on my graph that we peak at remembering names at age 22. You say, well, I can't even remember faces anymore. No problem, as long as you're over age 32. Remembering faces, we peak at age 32. If you're like me and over age 40, you probably missed out on that opportunity to make the Nobel Prize winning discovery you've always dreamed of. But here's the reason why I put the slide up. You'll notice that there are two data points that are actually the same. Only one data point repeats on my graph. Do you see it? It's life satisfaction. Life satisfaction peaks the first time at age 23. For some of us, let's put ourselves in the time machine, go back to age 23. You had no money. You had all the time in the world. You probably didn't have as many commitments as you do now in terms of family, job, so on and so forth. So the world's your oyster. Set your sail. Off you go. You've got your health. As I said, you've got your health, you've got time, you've got no money, but it's fun. And if you screw it up, it's okay. Monday will be here in a couple of days. You can start all over again, right? By the way, if you're wondering about the lowest points of life satisfaction, I didn't put it on my graph here, but the lowest points of life satisfaction occur between ages 45 and 52. Why is that? Because everybody wants a piece of you at those ages. You're trying to figure out how to get the kids up out of the nest into college on their own 2 feet. You're worrying about paying for that. Your work wants a piece of you all the time, right? So as much contribution, because remember, you're now at almost the peak of your earnings career. So it's a very stressful time. Good news, beginning in your early 50s, it begins to turn around, and you'll notice that life satisfaction peaks again at age 69. Why age 69? Sociologists believe you're at the highest average of those three factors. You have your health, right? You have money. Remember, when you were young, you had no money at all the time. When you're in your mid 40s to early 50s, you probably have a few bucks, but you don't have any time to do anything with it. When you get to age 69, you have your health, you have a few bucks in the bank, and socially, you're still connected in that you can devote your energy to the things that you think are most meaningful in your life, right? Hey, more good news though. Happiness with your body peaks at age 74. I think it's more acceptance, right? Been playing with the same deck for 73 years. It probably isn't going to change. And even better news, age 82 marks your peak at psychological well-being. What does that mean? Psychological well-being is defined as tomorrow is going to be better than today. But John, you just said that I may be caring for a loved one. I may be living by myself. I may have to figure out ways to access the things that are important to me. That's all true. But we kind of see mortality in the distance, and we really take time to focus on the things that are most important to us. And that leads well into psychological well being. The reason it peaks at age 82 is it's often in our early 80s where we'll have our first major medical crisis, which may begin to detract from that psychological well being. So, wrapping this all up, what difference does it make? Well, as I mentioned, we're going from a retirement that might have been designed and might have been lived through other family members for 5 to 7 years, now looking at 25 to 30 years. The new question is not just a math problem. It's not just how much will retirement cost. As I said earlier, that's not incorrect, it's just incomplete. The new question is, what will I be doing in retirement? And this is really important to help your employees kind of think about, and for you as individuals to think about. Because if I told you, instead of listening today about MIT and 8,000 days and all this stuff, let's say instead we sat down to put together a jigsaw puzzle. Well, what would the most important first step be? The most important first step, and people always say corners, straight edges, those are important steps, not the most important first step, which is you have to look at the picture on the box, right? Once we look at the picture on the box, now we can assess the pieces that we've got in front of us. Well, much the same in retirement, right? If we don't take the time to think about what the picture on the box looks like, all we have are a bunch of pieces. We have 401k plans, we have health insurance, we have 529 plan. We got all this stuff floating all around, but we've never put any method to the madness. So we need to be thinking more about what will I be doing, and maybe not what will I be doing for the next 30 years. Maybe it's just taking a look at the next 5 years, right? If I were to look at my life like a short story, who would the characters be? Where would it take place? What's the plot? What do I want it to look like? What could go wrong? Where's the conflict? And if there was conflict, how might we resolve it? Right? Beginning to think in these terms will allow us to develop a narrative about what we're about, because what we often find is that people are not as prepared psychologically for retirement as they are financially. And that's kind of scary, because oftentimes we'll talk about how people have prepared enough financially, but the psychological preparation may be well in arrears as well. And so this is why human expertise matters, right? Conversations about who I am, about what I'm trying to do, about my fears and what excites me. Look, our tools can do a lot of good things for people and do some basic education, but conversations around what will we be doing in the future are essential really to effective retirement planning. So we talked about 8,000 days. We talked about these 4 different phases of retirement. Remember, determined by those 3 resources: physical, financial, and social. And we talked about how all those kind of knit together, thinking about the picture on the box, right? And being able to assess then the pieces that we've collected so that we can assemble them in a way that best draws our picture out of that pile of pieces. I'm going to end with a quote from my favorite philosopher, Dr. Joe Coughlin, who says the 4 phases of retirement enable a clear vision to plan and anticipate what's likely to come. And here's the key. Remember I said about moving the decision point away from the moment of crisis? Effective preparation can reduce the stress of uncertainty and boost prolonged independence and control in the life that we wish to lead tomorrow. It's never really too early to be thinking about what that next phase of life looks like. In fact, I'll quote my favorite philosopher, Yogi Berra, no offense to Dr. Joe, but Yogi Berra famously said, the future ain't what it used to be. The fact that we have very high likelihoods now of living into our 80s and 90s changes the picture on our box, and our picture may change multiple times over that period. So, folks, we will follow up with the team from 401k Plan Professionals with a white paper that's written by the folks at MIT. It's a 4-pager. It's not written academically, even people like me can understand it, but it's written by Dr. Joe Coughlin, and it's a summary of some of the things that I spoke about today. So, if I hit on something that you're interested in, you've been thinking about, you think would be of value to your employees, certainly bring it up with your advisor at 401k Plan Professionals, because they probably helped companies and individuals navigate similar circumstances to kind of what you're thinking about. So write it in the margins, circle a few things on that white paper, bring it in, have a conversation, because as we said, human expertise matters, especially when it comes to long-term retirement success. So I'm going to invite Jenna to come back on if we had any questions that might have come in during our session today. Happy to help.
All right. Thank you so much, John. This is just really fascinating information. We did have one question so far that came in. What is the retirement age used in determining the final 8,000 days, like the 8,000 retirement segment? I mean, if you do the math, is it kind of that age 65, 66, give or take?
Yeah, it's give or take, because especially if you're looking at, life expectancy will increase with better education, higher income. Um, but it's typically in that early to mid 60s range, right? If you're talking 22 or so years, actually 21.9. So you're looking probably around ages 64, 65. They're looking at a joint life expectancy somewhere around 87 or 88 years old. And if you're looking at individual life expectancies, men, I think, is somewhere around age 82 now. Women probably around age 84. So that 8,000 days is kind of a rough approximation. So yeah, it could be much longer for people that decide to retire in their mid to late 50s even. We see that quite a bit now.
Hmm. Okay. Had another one come in. I've read that fertility rates are declining around the Western world. Will fewer babies impact the way that we age, and if so, how?
Very, very much so. And two ways that I can really think of. One way which impacts maybe many of you who are listening today is changes in the labor force, right? We don't have a crystal ball about what's happening what is going to happen in the United States, but we can already see it in other areas of the world like China, Japan, South Korea, Western Europe, where low fertility rates are putting great stress on social safety nets, but also the availability of labor and attracting and retaining talent. So again, this bodes in favor of the aging worker who maybe if they can work just a few more years can help fill that gap. But really, the other thing that we can think about is that on the other end, we need to think about caregiving, and we need to think about where we're going to be living, social connections, so on and so forth, because Jen, our families are not as big as they used to be generationally. So the caregiving plan used to be mom and dad would live on several acres in the corner of the family farm, and the 10 to 12 kids would pitch in to take care of them. Now we have 2.3 kids. We live all over the United States or the world, and it's somewhat of kind of even a labor shortage there in terms of caregiving. So it does impact, and it will continue to impact based on what industry you're in, based on kind of the caregiving outlook. It really does impact many, many things as we age.
Yeah, obviously we work a lot in the financial aspect of retirement, and it's interesting you talk so much about that social piece of it and the relationships. And I do talk to many people that they like having that social aspect at work, and they want to keep active and I find if they love what they're doing and they love who they're working with, they do want to stay on. One more question.
Yeah.
What would you say is kind of the biggest challenge with the extended period of longevity?
Well, you just touched on it. So MIT says this epidemic of loneliness and boredom. It's a really big issue. In fact, there are researchers at BYU University in Provo who say that for those that say they're often or sometimes lonely, it's approximately the physical equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of the sedentary lifestyle and the way we kind of degrade mentally, right? Because we lock ourselves in our room, turn on our favorite cable TV news channel, which drives us crazy, makes us paranoid, right? But it's about those social connections. I can't emphasize enough. So usually, Jenna, I'll be doing a meeting at a company or with individual wealth clients, and it usually never fails that somebody will come up to me. It's usually a guy because a woman would never tell me her age. And he'll say, "How old do you think I am?" Now, I'm leaving your audience in a little secret. I always guess low. I'll say, "You're 72." And he'll say, "No, actually, I'm 84 years old. I still work part-time. I still drive and I volunteer here and here." I can't, I just can't underestimate the importance of the social engagement. And it kind of runs counter because sometimes the attitude towards retirement is, I can't wait to take my foot off the gas, kind of sit back, relax. And certainly that's understandable. But there comes a time where we do need to accept invitations because meeting new people is incredible. And basically, what also will happen as we age is that our social network will begin to dwindle if we're not refreshing it over time. Our friends will begin to move away because they may need the care of family members. They may pass away, and our social network shrinks. You don't want to be the last man standing. You could say it beats the alternative, and I would argue back, not if you've ever met anyone who's lost everyone around them that made life worth living. So can't emphasize enough. If you're not, people say, "John, I'm an introvert." Believe it or not, Jenna, so am I, which means introverts like groups of 2 or 4 people, not 200 or 400. Extroverts, party people, the more the merrier. They're usually fine. But challenge yourself to accept invitations and put yourself in a place where you might, even if you don't like the activity that's going on, you may wind up with a new relationship or two, a new friend that comes out of it.
Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
Really good things to think about. Okay, so just wanted to mention again, we have our 2025 webinar series, which this is a part of. So on the next slide, we have kind of what's slated out for the rest of 2025. So you can look at the different topics. This QR will take you where you can register for any of them, all of them. Even if you can't attend them live, you get the recording automatically, just like you'll get with this one. So I always tell people just register anyway. And then if you have any feedback for us, if you have questions on anything we covered today, feel free to contact myself or any of my team members. We're happy to help you. And then, as John mentioned, if you work at an organization, say you're in human resources, and this is content that you want to bring to your staff, that would be something that we can certainly entertain as well. So thank you so much, John, for this great insight, great information. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending today. We really appreciate it. And as he mentioned at the beginning, he will be in contact with you with the certificate that you can submit for the SHRM credit. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.